And we ask you to just consider your own location where you are and just consider the people who've lived on that land before you. Yeah, so welcome to everybody. For those of you who might be new to this work, Psychosocial Rehabilitation British Columbia Advanced Practice, we're intended to provide some leadership, education, and guidance to mental health field and to help develop and put effective evidence-based psychosocial rehabilitation practices into place. We're so very grateful to our presenters for their support and expertise. And as you'll know, that those lovely people, they do this work for the love of the work. There's not any financial remuneration involved, but we really appreciate their help and their expertise. If you are new to us as well, you'll find 70 approximately webinars that are recorded on our website. So please visit psyrehab.ca. And if you are wondering if this session is recorded, it is indeed recorded. And thanks to Manny, it will be up and running in about 3 or 4 days from now. And you can access it there and share that with whomever you wish. So yeah, so just really our purpose is to think about evidence-based practices and support organizations to implement as best as possible those evidence-based practices. So we are very grateful for the Ministry of Health who set us on this path with some financial support about 7 years ago. And of late, thanks to Fraser Health Authority, we got a fresh injection of funds so that we can continue this work. So we're very grateful to everybody. At the end of the session, we will send you a link for evaluation. We are grateful for the 10 minutes it may take to fill that in. So please let us know how we're doing, if there's anything we can do better, or if there are any areas that you would like us to speak more about. So please, we do read those and we'd love to hear them. Do want to let you know about an upcoming webinar, so please put this in your calendar for June 11th. We have Jen Cusick and her team who will be presenting the new guidelines for peer support training. It's like they literally get released June 1st. So we are very grateful to have Jen, who's on our team, to present on the 11th. And also we're going to hear from Hazel Meredith the following week about innovations of peer practice in over on the island. So she will talk primarily about a new service supporting individuals in hospital as they transition to the community with peer support. So please stay tuned for that. So I'm just going to introduce our presenters for today and then hand it over to Pamela, our first presenter. So the first person that we have with us is Dr. Shannon Dames, who spearheaded the development of Roots to Thrive program, which we'll hear about today, and continues to work as a nursing profession and resilience researcher. Currently, her work centers on promoting the integration of psychedelic assisted therapies in the healthcare system. We're also going to hear from Dr. Pam Cringshaw, a medical doctor with strong interest in chronic pain, mental health, and psychedelic medicine. She's a clinical instructor at UBC and adjunct prof at UVic. She is one of the founding board members of the Canadian Psychedelic Association. Dr. Cringshaw is actively involved in research relating to psychotropin, Mdma, ketamine, COVID, mental wellness, and neurogenesis. She's a medical lead on the Roots to Thrive ketamine-assisted therapy program and treats healthcare providers with PTSD, depression, anxiety, and addiction. And as well, we have dear Benny Bloomfield, is a registered nurse, addiction nurse fellow with BCCSU, a client care coordinator with the Fraser Health Authority. Benny is a co-founder of the Fraser Valley Psychedelic Society and is building a team to bring Roots to Thrive program to BC Lower Mainland. He's a patient partner in the first cohort of Roots to Thrive, which he will describe as the most healing experience of his life. So you can see that we have a wonderful, wonderful lineup for you today. And many of you may have heard a recent series on CBC where these lovely people really engaged, I think, great discussions across the country and to bring this information forward. So again, over to Pam, who will share her slides. So we'll just give her a minute to pull those up. I saw them. They are very beautiful slides. So over to Pam. And as always, just please type in if you have questions into the chat or thoughts. We will hold those until the end if that's okay. And then Regina and myself and Manny will come on and we'll just facilitate that discussion at the end. So over to Pam. Thanks very much.
There we go. Unmuted now. Can you see the slides okay? Thumbs up?
Yep, thumbs up. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. All right, so this will be a very brief history of psychedelic molecules, plant, and fungi medicines. Okay, let's get this moving here. There we go. So I am presenting to you on the unceded territory of the Klahoose Nation. I have no conflicts related to this presentation, and I assure you there will be typos in this, so apologies in advance. So here we go. So we're going to start with psychedelics. We think of psychedelic medicine, psychedelic therapies in 3 waves. So I'm going to do the first wave, second wave, and the third wave. And so the first wave comes from wherever we started, whenever we began in our indigenous use, us all being indigenous to this planet, of course, all migrating out of Africa. Some of us migrated a little bit, some of us migrated very far, and some migrated onward and continuing. So this is what we all would have had somewhere a connection to in our indigenous origins. So I'm just going to run through a few because there's so many of them. So what I've chosen to do is just hit on a few of the historical and current indigenous use that is closest to us geographically in North America, in the Americas for the most part. So South America, many of you will have heard of this brew called ayahuasca. It is a combination of 2 plants that are found nowhere near each other, and somehow the indigenous peoples of South Americas found a way that they were to be combined and made into a brew. It is the Banisteriopsis capii vine and so I usually can say this really well until I'm presenting I'm not even going to say it, forget it. And anyways, when you brew them together and make a brew that is a psychotropic medicine that can last for 4 to 12 hours. If you move into South and Central America, many of you will have seen this cactus if you've been in Arizona or down to Mexico, San Pedro cactus, also called huachuma. And this we have better documentation on, probably going back at least 2,000 years of use into probably closer to 5,700 years of use. And when this is brewed into a tea or a soup-like beverage, it gives a psychotropic experience of 8 to 12 hours experience. Moving into Central America, more into northern Mexico and southern US, what is now the southern US, is a peyote. It is also a cactus with the active ingredient of mescaline. And when it is brewed into either a button, when it's eaten, or sometimes into a brew, it is of an 8 to 12 hour duration. Moving a bit more worldwide are psilocybin mushrooms, magic mushrooms. Many of you will have heard that term. There are over 260 known psilocybin mushrooms in the world right now, and I think there's a couple right now that are being DNA typed to see if they're new or if they exist in current ones that we know of. And when people imbibe in these, the duration of that experience is 4 to 8 hours. Worldwide, this is why this is the known map of where psilocybin mushrooms are found in the world. And as you can see, it is truly a worldwide phenomena. We see it all the way through the Americas, north to south, through into Africa, into Europe, Northern Europe, and into Asia, even into Australia. So truly a worldwide phenomena of use. Other mushrooms that we also see that are used that are psychotropic psychedelic medicines are the Amanita Muscaria, and we see that in North America and Northern Europe. And from in Canada, quite likely that there was and is ongoing Amanita Muscaria use as a psychotropic medicine. And its experience can be 12 to 14 hours and has to be used very carefully because there are species, there are in this species ones that are actually deadly. Moving back into Africa, in Central Africa, we have ibogaine or aboga, which is a shrub tree, and it was used and it continues to be used in the Bwiti tradition, spiritual tradition, as a brew, and it is a 4 to 6 hour. So that's just a very short first wave general. There's a lot more I have touched on, only just a small taste on it. Moving into the second wave, we kind of consider the second wave of psychedelic medicines from about the 1950s to about the 1970s, give or take a few years in both directions. And in this area, we're talking about science and counterculture. So lab molecules come into being in this phase, and some of this actually predates the 50s, but I've just kind of put them in there. So LSD was actually found in a lab derived in a lab off of, made from ergot, which is a fungi, or a fungus infection in 1938, and it kind of sat on the shelf unused at Sandoz Laboratories in Switzerland. And then it was re-looked at again in the 40s, and then that's when you hear about LSD coming up more in the way we think of it now. So it was actually not being looked at for psychotropic medicine. It was actually was derived because Albert Hofmann was looking for a medication for Sandoz for headaches. And so it sat on the shelf untouched until 1943. And interestingly, then as it started to get disseminated, psychiatrists and physicians could just write to Sandoz and ask for some samples, and they would be sent bottles or vials of LSD. And mostly we were seeing that used, the psychiatrists had the biggest interest in it. And there was, over the years, from the 1950s onward, there were about 1,000 scientific research trials with LSD in the medical and psychiatric research populations. And primarily what they were seeing the trend towards was treatment for alcoholism. Many other disorders as well, but definitely, as you'll see in a little bit, I have some Canadian slides that show the efficacy of the LSD trials with alcohol. Oh, these slides right here, I am. So moving into Canadian in this wave is in Saskatchewan. So Saskatchewan was really the birthplace of Canadian healthcare. And that's postulated why we were seeing LSD studies happen in Saskatchewan at the Weyburn Mental Hospital. So Drs. Osmond and Dr. Hoffer, who is a psychiatrist, were both quite interested in these medications and were using them at the Weyburn Mental Hospital. They were using LSD and mescaline. And Erica Dick is a phenomenal Canadian historian, and has a lot of the data we have about this comes from her digging in her books and her interviews. And an interesting story around this is they were actually giving LSD to the staff. At that time, they thought LSD maybe replicated psychosis. And the reason they were giving it to the staff is to induce empathy, so that the staff would know what it might be like to have a psychosis. But of course, LSD is not a psychotic medicine. It's a medicine that can give you hallucinations, but they're hallucinations. You're not unaware that what you're seeing might be altered. But nonetheless, what is an interesting story that I heard Erica Dick talk about is that how they actually gave LSD to one of the structural architects of who is building hospitals. And under the influence of LSD, he was able to see and experience what the hospital environment felt like. And even though they were starting to realize that it wasn't actually psychosis that they were feeling, but he observed that the checkerboard floors that we saw in hospitals, the black and white checkerboard, he says, we can't do that anymore because I could see how a patient might think that those black checkers are a hole, and why would they want to get out of their bed if they might fall into a hole? So it's interesting to think of that, somebody who's not a medical professional under the influence of a medication like LSD might have a whole new perspective on how we might build a more holistic or healthy hospital. And that was back in the 50s. So we have maybe a little bit to learn here too on how we might better develop things from the patient perspective on how the experience of being in these institutions feels like. And again, like I said earlier, they were primarily treating alcoholism with great success. About like somewhere between 50 to 90%, which exceeds what we get right now in our alcoholism treatments currently. The term psychedelic was coined by Dr. Osmond in letters that were documented to Aldous Huxley. I mentioned this earlier, 2-year follow-up of these studies at the Weyburn Hospital, 50 to 90% recovery in alcoholism. And of note also in British Columbia, in New Westminster, was the Hollywood Sanatorium, or also called the Hollywood Hospital, where LSD therapies and other hallucinogens were used there to treat mood disorders and alcoholism. And it was quite in the media at the time, and I'm not bringing any of that in here, but a lot of Hollywood stars would come here for treatment or for therapy. And a lot of those records were kind of kept a little bit hidden more and are just starting to be recovered because it was protecting their identity. So a lot of politicians, family members would be in these therapy programs at these hospitals. As I mentioned earlier, there was over about 1,000 scientific articles from 1915 to 1961 on LSD, and mostly in alcoholism was really where we were seeing the trend to efficacy. And then it became a controlled substance in the 60s. Other lab molecules, Mdma was made by Merck in 1912. It's an empathogenic medication. It lasts 3 to 6 hours. And in the 70s, of note, this is when there's a lot of psychiatrists that are just at the end of their career that actually used MDMA legally before it was scheduled. And they said it was a very, very promising medication for psychotherapy, psychoanalytic therapies, couples therapies. They really lobbied hard against it being scheduled, especially in the US. And there was, as they knew it was about to be scheduled and taken out of the market for therapeutic use, especially in the US, MDMA tablets were pumped out by the tens of thousands and distributed. So people had huge caches of MDMA to continue underground psychotherapy. And like I said, that the medical doctors lobbied very hard against this because they saw it as a very promising new therapy. Ketamine, which is a psychedelic-like medicine, and I'm bringing it in because we're going to talk about it a little bit more with Shannon and Benny. And that was synthesized in '62 as an anesthetic. It has many off-label uses, and off-label just means that it has that a pharmaceutical company did not take it through a clinical trial for that specific use, but it has been found, and there's a lot of clinical trials now going on, and current common use for using ketamine for depression, OCD, addiction, eating disorders, anxiety, chronic pain, and of course as an anesthetic and as a procedural sedation medication. And still in this time frame of the second wave, the peyote moved into use with the Navajo Nation, and it was protected under the Native American Church. And this continues to this day. This is a protected medicine. The peyote people may use this in their spiritual ceremonies, and there are Native American churches in Canada, and there are Native American churches in the US, and in some cases they are using ayahuasca as well. Psilocybe mushrooms were brought into our knowledge in Western, not indigenous cultures, but in Western via Valentina and R. Gordon Wasson when they visit Maria Sabina in Mexico. Valentina was an amateur mycologist with a Russian background, and she was the one that drug R. Gordon Wasson down to Mexico. And they met Maria Sabina. They both wrote about it. Valentina published a week prior to R. Gordon Wasson, but his got a little bit more fanfare as it was published in Life magazine. And then in that time, we move into our negative history of shame around the use of LSD. The CIA saw LSD as being a mind control possibility, and so conducted a lot of experiments, and some were conducted in Canada at McGill under the name the MK Ultra program. This was conducted on people that did not consent. It's quite a sad time in history, and there was some compensation to some of the victims of this, but not adequate at all. And so some of the negativity around these medicines come from this unethical use of them. And now we move into the political history. And I think it's really important that people understand the political history. So as you can see, what I've been trying to show here a little bit is that these were medicines that were being used by medical doctors and in science, and there was legitimate research going on. And then, then they come out of use. And a lot of people assume that they come out of use because they were dangerous. And that is really not the case. They come out of use because of politics. So in the late 60s and the 70s, we see the counterculture emerging. The youth of the US and Canada are using these medications, and they're not wanting to go to war. They're speaking out against their parents. You've got Harvard professor Timothy Leary, leading studies that first are in the academia, and then he becomes quite a bit more outspoken. And of interest, the psilocybin projects that he did at Harvard did show to reduce recidivism in people that were incarcerated. Into the Canadian history, the same sort of thing was happening. You know, you begin to criminalize the drugs of the people who are challenging you. And what is interesting, moving just slightly away from psychedelics, but into other criminalized drugs in Canada. And this is a book well worth reading, High Times in Canada by Neil Boyd, who is a criminologist at SFU, who chronicles, you know, how our Canadian government used politics and racism to criminalize medications that were in the public realm. So, you know, marijuana, opium, and psychedelics are all ones that moved into the criminal code. The Opium Act of 1908 was brought in against the Chinese. The Chinese were originally brought into Canada as a very cheap labor source, but then, you know, as they were no longer needed, what you can't criminalize people, but you can criminalize what they do. And so what that was happening is opium dens are being criminalized. You can see as we move through the list here, the cocaine gets moved in 1908. You get other drugs like marijuana going against Mexicans and African descendant people. And then the Narcotics Control Act of 1954, oddly doubling the penalties for these medications or these substances or drugs, despite the fact that drug use was actually declining in Canada at that use, and it was well documented to be declining. They decided to double the penalties. And then in 1996, we had the Controlled Drug and Substance Act that schedules in Canada all the medications into three schedules. And here's where it gets a little crazy, but maybe all of you remember this. The war on drugs was really full of a lot of propaganda. We all probably saw some of that if you went to school in the 80s at all. The war on drugs, this is your brain on drugs. And these are, you know, these are from the tabloids, of course, but, you know, this was ubiquitous. You know, doctors blame LSD, girl gives birth to a frog, LSD fed ape rapes TV actress. And it's, you know, so handy that they put you know, an arrow there so you can figure out which one's the ape. But, you know, I think these are hilarious kind of things. LSD made me a prostitute. And so that war on drugs came out of the US and Nixon and into international drug treaties, of course, which Canada is part of the international community. And then had to follow along with that, even though I think like a lot of the medical community in both countries were not in favor. And I just find this is a little fun piece of trivia. It's a little bit outside that time, but you know, the golden guide that we all saw in grade 5 and 6, well, there was a golden guide to hallucinogenic plants that only had one printing. And then went on. So into the third wave, science and indigenous use returns. So one of the groundbreaking things that we saw in the media very strongly was John Hopkins psilocybin end of life trials that were that were very groundbreaking. So they used lab synthesized psilocybin. The therapeutic dyad was created for this protocol, and people name this as one of the top 5 significant experiences, positive experiences of their lives. Another groundbreaking trials that have been happening over the last 20 years now, really, with MAPS, has been with Mdma for PTSD. You have seen this in the media. It was just published again. One of their latest trials, just with their data, which is phenomenal. But this is their previous phase 2, which was showing that of people that had an average of 14 years of PTSD, 84% had developmental traumas. After their MDMA session, 67% of those patients with PTSD no longer qualified for that diagnosis, and 88% of them had clinically meaningful reductions of their symptoms. So generally, the research to date is strong and growing. In psilocybin, we are seeing good clinical trials and good research and results around alcoholism, tobacco cessation, eating disorders, PTSD, partner violence, and generally violence reduction. MDMA, we're seeing good findings in PTSD, eating disorders, chronic pain, LSD, addiction, anxiety, depression, alcoholism, ketamine, depression, OCD, eating disorders, addiction, chronic pain, suicidality, and ayahuasca and DMT. DMT is the active molecule in ayahuasca, addiction, anxiety, depression, and trauma. This is just a small sampling of the universities that are doing psychedelic research right now. In fact, I could make 5 of these slides right now. This is just one of them. And so in Canada, in 2012, all these medications were actually in the special access program where physicians could apply for access to them. In 2012, the Conservative government moved them into Schedule J, which made them ineligible. And then therefore we had to do it, Section 56 applications on a case-by-case basis. And as everyone knows, cannabis is also often considered a psychedelic medicine, and as you know, was medicinalized in 2001 and moved into recreation in 2018. So we are moving forward with Health Canada. Health Canada is moving forward. They are considering moving these medications back into special access. They have indicated that indication. And clinical trials ongoing since 2013 have been able to get exemptions through the Section 56 exemptions to conduct clinical trials with these substances. Academic psychedelic programs are popping up all over Canada. Vancouver Island University will launch in fall 2022. University of Ottawa had 3 courses last summer and is looking at a master's level program. Trinity Western, Justice Institute both offered courses. Queen's University, U of T, and UBC all have plans for some form of psychedelic academic courses. In the US, there's been big announcements at Johns Hopkins, UC Berkeley, UCSF, and CIIS. And with that, I will round it up. I'm sorry if that felt like it was coming out of a fire hose. And these are many of the resources that I used. On to you, Shannon.
Okay, thank you so much, Pam. Very interesting. I'm gonna try and get my slides up here smoothly. I'm going to catch us up on some time, which means I'm going to be even more of a fire hose than Pam was. So maybe I like to say when I do this that this is really real knowledge is about less about what you memorize and more about what you cannot forget. So in other words, if something blows by you and you didn't quite hold on to it, or you get distracted because I'm just talking really, really fast. You can ask a question at the end, and B, I will generally, anything really important, I will circle up at the end and summarize. So sit back and relax, in other words. I'm going to be talking about a public program that, and I say that, in other words, we are funded through primarily public dollars and grant dollars from federal and provincial sources, and locally here in the region as well. And our project is really to roadmap how we as public entities will engage with psychedelic assisted therapies as they emerge across Canada, and us being one of the first to start really working through the kinks, which is quite a process. It's been plenty of cans of worms as we go. So I'll talk a bit about kind of what that looks like and how we're doing that. We have a service delivery side, which was funded through local funds, donated funds, and the Canadian Institute for Health Research, where we developed we combined 2 programs, really. We took a 3-month resilience program framework called Roots to Thrive, and we combined it with a ketamine assisted therapy program, where we have 3 sessions embedded in a 3-month community of practice. And I'll talk a little bit about the details of that as we go here. And then there's the 2 other prongs are that we are now researching this RTT CAT, which is the service delivery side. And we're in parallel developing an education arm as well, so that we can grow in capacity, train providers, as well as a public service to the many other providers that are going to be wanting to support this work, is providing an accredited venue to do that. So why are we doing all this? We're doing it because we know that in Canada here, we're up into the almost 20 million people that are suffering from mental health conditions. And with our current frontline therapies, only up to about 4 million of those are really being served by typical pharmaceuticals, which tends to be the front line for those where psychotherapy is not quite enough. So that leaves us with almost 15 million continuing to suffer, where we now consider these treatment resistant, which I would like to cancel that entire term and say that we are simply lacking evidence-informed and impactful tools in our current mental health toolbox. We're really looking at this entire process is really looking at second, third line therapies, bringing them more to the forefront based on the evidence. So all this just to further underscore the need here. We know this used to be, for many of us that have been, in healthcare for many years, we're kind of conditioned, perhaps I could even say colonized, to kind of other our patients, right? It's happening with them, our mentally ill, our addicted people, even the way we language, rather than it's happening with them. we are now them. By the age of 40, about half of us can resonate with a mental health diagnosis, whether we choose to go and get it formally diagnosed or not. We are now all experiencing or touched by mental illness, whether it's us or our loved ones. I think it's pretty rare to find somebody who this is not directly impacting. We are now, with this mental health crisis, seeing high suicide rates, and particularly with the drug poisoning pandemic going on as well. We are seeing ramifications in many different ways. So echoing a little bit of what Dr. Crosby Watler, who's the lead psychiatrist in the RTT-CAT program, he, after many years of practice, he talks about 3 core challenges that he really looks for when he sees people kind of in these treatment-resistant positions, and that's trauma, poverty, and disconnection. And I think he would also agree that disconnection is highly related to the first 2 and further perpetuates. So this program really is focused primarily, poverty is a pretty big one that's a bit out of our scope, but trauma and disconnection are really kind of 2 of our core focuses. So we know that the old way, the othering and the serving kind of a passive audience, the fixing system, more on the kind of traditional biomedical approach tend to be working for many, 20% actually are seeing some relief with that. So the new way is really about a lot of the idealistic principles we've been talking about for years, and that's putting patients at the front of their care and really enabling them to have an inner embodied experience where they're healing from the inside out rather than looking for solutions from the surface to do their healing. So a lot of this new program is empowering us as patient partners, because I am a patient and I am also a partner bringing this forward, as are pretty much everyone on our RTT-CAT team. So it's really about engaging this as how are we as patient partners carrying this work forward? How are we supporting ourselves and bringing others into this kind of new way of learning to be human? So RTT-CAT, what the heck is this? This is our 12-week community practice program. We meet every week in a virtual space, and then we have ketamine-assisted therapy sessions included in that 12-week process. And the ketamine, rather than thinking about that like medicine, we really look at the ketamine as a facilitator. So those of us that have very hypervigilant brains, I am one of those, and many, especially the more letters you have after your name, I think the more at risk you are for being a hypervigilant brain. It is very difficult for us to move into the lower brainwave states where, our insights happen, where we connect to our pilot light, where we, feel empowered and resourced from within. So these medical adjuncts really enable us to get into our bodies so we can start really becoming aware of what's stuck in the body that's keeping us ticking and hypervigilant, and also provide a pathway for us to heal from the inside out and in a way that we've not yet been exposed to. So we do this through a model that is very careful to not put any chemical or any one chemical or substance at the core, kind of like the whole magic bullet approach, where people are attaching to that outside of their inner resources. Rather, this healing work happens because as a side effect of using these medicines, we are seeing, when done in the right set and setting, meaning people feel very safe and there's a trust developed, that secure attachment can take place, or at least different levels of promoting secure attachment. So people can start to feel that they have enough and that they're good enough at a very, very deep level. And when that feeling starts to embed, that is when we start to see the loosening of the attachments on the surface. So a lot of this is working through community to develop trust and secure attachment, which we use multiple adjuncts. You'll see all these petals, not specifically ketamine. There's many other resources as well, where we're really helping deal with each little barrier so people can kind of sink back in to their embodied self, which most of us have not had access to. We have this I actually need to update because the team is growing and growing and growing, including Benny here. And it is with each cohort, our patient partners, often there's a number of them that will come up and join the team so that we can kind of grow in capacity. We're a fairly flat organization, which means we all kind of have kind of roles and move like ants on the surface, and it is we do whatever we can to really kind of keep the power dynamics in a community framework so that we're really walking this out, just like we're doing in the program. So that the entire model is built off of 3 concepts, and it's really looking at the 2 resilience factors that we know promote human flourishing, and that's congruence and sense of coherence, both well seated in the literature and very much foundational pieces of what we now work with in varying educational facilities. So, and then working on these, we cannot do at the level of the mind. So we do not advance in our congruence and sense of coherence by simply learning and memorizing concepts and getting into the research at the level of the mind. We do this by getting into our bodies and by testing it out in relationship with safe others. So what Roots to Thrive is we are really a group that is coming together with a similar intention to say we want to be that safe space, that we all get to show up and manifest who we really are in the world among each other, so that we can develop trust and we can start really kind of unlayering our onion, so to speak, in an environment that our nervous systems can handle. So we're really expanding our window of tolerance together, and which further enables us to integrate these new ways of being into our world outside of the Roots to Thrive community that we embed in. So if I really boil this down into a nutshell, I would say that what we are trying to do is relearn what it means to be human, relearn what it means to kind of take back our colors and be in the world as our authentic selves without having to make ourselves smaller, make ourselves quieter, take off our icing essentially so that we will fit in the world, which we know is causing us a lot of anxiety, depression, and many other mental health conditions that stem from these 2 not so helpful energies that get stuck in our body. So I'm going to talk just really briefly about some of these concepts. The sense of coherence concept, and these are some of our team members planted in here in their faces, Todd, Helen, and Geraldine. Sense of coherence is really about our orientation to the world. So if I have a low sense of coherence, I generally feel like the world is on top of me, meaning I'm oppressed by it, I'm threatened by it. I live in a hyper-vigilant state, always looking for the threat. When is the shoe going to drop? That would be low sense of coherence. I do not feel in control of my world, nor do I necessarily understand it. High sense of coherence is when we are on top of it, kind of like if you were playing a game or a video game and you can see it all. You maybe even got people in the background saying, go there, right? You've got a team behind you and you're navigating this together. And in some ways it can be kind of fun. So depending on your sense of coherence, the event might be very, very stressful if you're underneath it, or if you're on top of it, it could actually be kind of fun and stimulating to navigate it. So it's a huge factor in our ability to thrive in the surface of our world. And congruence is the other factor. So I said 3: sense of coherence, congruence, and then polyvagal theory, which is really working in community, the people kind of coming around in circle. So this is the second one, congruence, and that is our ability to manifest in a real way in the world. So in our culture, by the age of 3, we already start recognizing that there are people in the world that there are parts of ourselves that are irritating to others in the world and that may even threaten our ability to feel love and belonging. So we start, shaving away, sticking little parts of ourselves that, are parts of us, but they might be irritating to some, maybe too loud, too big, too colorful. We start putting those little pieces into our shadow bag. And then we show up in the world as an ideal, as the gold star, with all this shame because we know it's not really us. It's kind of like imposter syndrome, really. We even lie, people say, how are you? And we always say good because they don't really want to know how we really are. So we get very practiced at putting this display on. And most of us are just chronic liars in the world because it isn't safe for us to show up in our real selves. So it ends up, we live out of this kind of more dissociated, displayed place rather than this heart open, vulnerable place. And congruence is really about our doing in the world coming from a heart opened state of being. And we know that this is the other huge factor that enables us to live life with inspiration, purpose, meaning, self-compassion. So, and there's a huge cost to it because there's a lot of vulnerability attached. So we spend a lot of our time practicing with each other in a very safe community of showing up, being honest, saying the thing we don't think we were ever able to say without feeling rejected. We test it out with each other. It's about finding the signal of who we are coming right from the birth canal before we were conditioned, and especially after the age of 7, when a lot of our conditioning takes place, is recognizing and tethering to our more centered, grounded being, the essence of who we are outside of the conditioning, outside of the noise of our culture. All right, and then this is that third concept, which is the doing this in community. We know, both from the science and from experience in our program, that if you have a group of people, and there's a few of them are come in with really insecure energies, their foundation is just cracked, and their confidence in the world is very, very low, and they're needing their security in outside sources, and that can be people, chemicals, activities, etc., that they will actually rise to the more secure individual in the room. So when we have a secure container, people come into it and they start to share, like attune to the more secure energy. It can go the opposite way as well, which is imperative that we have group agreements, that the people that are holding this work are largely grounded. We all get to fall off the bus, but we get to get on that bus. You have to kind of get back on that bus pretty quickly so that we can, stand and hold a pretty secure energy so we all feel really safe to show up. And this is really collective regulation. And it's how, even without chemicals, and in fact, it's even more, it is kind of the medicine itself enables us to get into our bodies outside of those hypervigilant brainwave states. So we do this by really reminding people, just gonna look at the time here, we're doing okay. We're really reminding people that this is not about where you're gonna get to. So we cannot focus on, you're gonna get cured, you're gonna, this expectation that we're gonna rise here. And so we like grit our teeth and white knuckle it and dissociate and go into freeze to get there. And realizing that actually all the healing is what happens along the way to get there. So the means of getting there, the not, taking a breath, slowing down, reaching out when we're feeling alone, scared, all those insecure energies is reaching out and tethering to somebody that can remind us of who we are. All of these things are the means of the process, and they are actually what gets us to the outcome. But we have to release the outcome in order to rise to it. So it's a bit of a mind shift change from those of us conditioned in individualistic, competitive, achievement-based cultures. It is a completely different way of handling our own healing journey and required to get the self-compassion necessary to really move forward in the sticky parts. Okay, so finally, through this process, we have a pretty in-depth intake process. We do the communities of practice. We have ketamine sessions, and then we also have integration sessions, all of which happen as a community. This program is primarily, with few exceptions, we do this work in community because of the role of compassionate witnessing and watching each other, being with each other in the healing journey, and how that informs the integration into our life around it. Our data to date has been very, very positive. We, looking at our first cohort, which had 16 people, we saw 100% have clinical improvements with generalized anxiety disorder. Depression, same thing, either moving into a milder category or at least having significant clinical improvement, which really depends on how high the number was when it started. PTSD, 100% that came in, screening positive, left screening negative, and same with our kind of work life impairments had just drastic improvements. Cohort 2, which was a much bigger cohort compared to cohort 1, we had 25 coming in with generalized anxiety disorder, 88 seeing significant clinical improvements, or coming down. And so when I say coming down a different category, they go, depending on the tool, it's like mild, moderate, severe, severe, extreme, that kind of thing. So coming down with clinical improvements there. And same with depression, which is much harder to hit in terms of a long-term resilience solution, very much means to the end. And it's definitely a longer than 3-month journey working at that one. PTSD also still very positive. 16 screen positive coming in, 12 left the program screening negative, and also significant improvements going from with work-life functionality. Okay, and then I'm just wrapping up here, Benny, and happy to pass the baton to you. We are now studying the RTT-CAT program, which is Roots to Thrive, the ketamine-assisted therapy, in a program of research where we are using the data for research purposes. We are developing an accredited education certificate, and we will study we are planning to study students, healthcare professionals experienced in the field, engaging in experiential training. Also, so looking at kind of well population training with ketamine-assisted therapy, hopefully MDMA as well. And really working with regulators right now to decide how we're going to do this, meaning do we need to go down a clinical trial road, or can we do this through observational studies, really to see how we can expedite open access and do this in a really feasible way so we can provide access to these very impactful medicines as soon as possible. So there you go. My fire hose is complete. I will pass this baton to Benny.
Thanks, Shannon. I've heard that presentation or pieces of it so many times from you, and every time I feel like I could hear it a million times. It hits home, and I'm just so grateful for the work and everything you've created, and Pam as well. It's an honor to be up here with you guys today. Let me try and share my screen here. Okay. Go. So yeah, thank you for having me here today. It's an honor to be up here and sort of share some of my story and my personal experience with Roots to Thrive. I was a patient in the first cohort that went through. One sec. Okay. So please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Benny. I live in Abbotsford with my wife, 2 young boisterous boys named Odin, a puppy named Odin and a kitten named Merlin. My passions in life include kind of cooking for friends, listening to podcasts, mindfulness meditation, and lately I've taken up gardening and trail running. Professionally, I've been a registered nurse for about 10 years. Most of that time I've spent in the, sorry, let me just try to hide this. So most of that time I've spent working in the mental health substance use field, mostly with houseless individuals experiencing severe mental health and substance use disorders. Over the past 2 or 3 years, I've become obsessively interested around psychedelic treatments and their efficacy for mental health and substance use disorders, having become disillusioned and disappointed with the rapidly spreading illnesses such as depression, anxiety, things like that. Once I started reading about the research around psychedelics and how effective they were, I was really flabbergasted by how little awareness our psychiatric and medical communities had around these treatments. And yeah, so driven by passion for this, I really tried to do everything I could to bring forward meaningful and, long-lasting treatments that would be able to support individuals that are suffering. I've sort of committed myself to doing everything I can as a compassionate human and as a healthcare professional to support bringing these treatments to individuals who would benefit from them in safe and effective ways. And to this end, over the past couple of years, I've started up a psychedelic society in my local community, led a research project that explored the knowledge and attitudes of healthcare professionals towards psychedelics and other emerging treatments, and have been working on bringing the Roots to Thrive program to my home community in the Fraser Valley. So as a nurse that spent my whole career working in mental health and substance use, I've long been a strong proponent for the principles of psychosocial rehabilitation. I'm aware that no one can heal or achieve a great sense of personal wellness in isolation. Individual wellness correlates strongly with community wellness. And like the others were suggesting, there's really no such thing as a magic pill or treatment. And this is as true for psychedelics as it is for antidepressants, antipsychotics, or any other evidence-based treatment. Psychedelics have the potential to allow individuals to connect with parts of themselves that they have been keeping locked up and buried deep in their minds, and it allows them to see themselves differently, open up to new possibilities, and to shift well-worn patterns that have been keeping them locked in unhealthy and reinforcing behaviors. So that's me. When I first heard about Roots to Thrive, I think I was already starting out on a path of healing and trying to deal with some of the mental health challenges I'd been carrying around since childhood. So let's get started in my story, or with my story. A few years ago, under a tremendous amount of stress at work and at home, my wife was diagnosed with cancer immediately after the birth of our second son. I found myself in the worst shape of my life and needed to step away from the work that I so loved. I was at that time the leader of a clinical ICM outreach team working with houseless individuals experiencing severe substance use disorders. At the time, I felt like this was the pinnacle of my career, a position I had dreamt of and worked towards for many years. Looking back at that time, I don't think I even realized how bad things were, but I'm sure everyone around me knew it. Looking back now, the signs were everywhere. There were problems with my marriage. I was yelling at my kids. I was overweight and eating fast food all the time. My hair was starting to fall out. I wasn't exercising, and I was drinking beer a lot more often than I'd like to admit. Not surprisingly, I started developing all kinds of strange health conditions at that time. I was having debilitating back pain and joint pain. My chest was hurting. I was having skin issues, and I started developing this weird allergy to meat that the doctors couldn't figure out. So obviously, stress was really taking its toll. I had nothing left in the tank, but I didn't really know where to turn. And I imagine this is something that a lot of you can probably relate to. Sorry, then, thought I missed a slide here. One sec. Okay, sorry. So at that point, I heard about the Roots to Thrive program through some contacts that I had in the psychedelic community. And I was immediately intrigued and really dying to learn more. So when Shannon reached out to me and invited me to apply for the first cohort, I knew it was something special, and I needed and wanted to do everything that I could to partake. So there I was, knowing I was at the precipice of something huge, and all I needed to do was show up with an open heart and a willingness to try, which turned out to be one of the best decisions of my life. So Roots to Thrive, as Shannon has beautifully explained, sort of consists of two components, at least it did for me, the Zoom meetings that occurred every week for 12 weeks, and 3 psychedelic assisted therapy sessions nested on weeks 5, 6, and 8 of the program. I'd like to take a few minutes to describe sort of what those experiences were like for me and the healing that I received from each of those components. So first, looking at the Zoom meetings, based on the principles of trauma-informed care, the online groups had a consistent format, and we connected with the same small group of people week to week. The meeting started out as a large group for a knowledge sharing session called Coming to Know. Each week focused on a particular topic that was designed to support participants to increase their resilience by building inner congruence and outer coherence that Shannon sort of described eloquently. One of the facilitators taught us a new skill each week or shared some knowledge. The program elder shared a piece of Indigenous wisdom related to the topic. And then we would often do a pause practice or meditation that would get us out of our heads and more into our bodies before joining our breakout groups. So then after that, we would join our small group of 6 or 7 participants, supported by a pair of facilitators. We would do a short round of check-ins where we would name a sensation and an emotion that we were feeling. And then we would do a longer check-in where we would take turns answering a specific question and doing our best to stay in the here and now, avoiding the temptation to get into storytelling and listening to each other with our hearts, our minds, and our bodies. To be honest, the best part of these online groups is an idea that they call unconditional positive regard. The format that was created really led to feelings of safety, support, and love. I felt these things in my body as soon as I got on the calls. I felt like no matter how vulnerable I was, I would be supported. And I've compared, when I've been talking about this with friends, I've compared this experience of jumping on the calls and how that felt like to sort of getting off a plane and being greeted by someone that I've been friends with my whole life. But to be honest, it actually felt a lot safer than that. And more often than not, the sensation I experienced at the end of each group was soreness in my cheeks from all the smiling I had been doing throughout the whole group. And as far as what the impact of doing these online groups has been on me sort of more long-term, I feel like I've become more connected with my body and my emotions, more aware of how I've been numbing myself. I've gained practice and competence using some of the breathing exercises and mindfulness practices that they've taught me. And it's helped me sort of incorporate them into my daily routines. I think, for a long time, I believed in the promise of mindfulness. I believed in the evidence for it, but it always was a really hard thing to actually take it and incorporate it and start doing it. And so I feel like they were super helpful in terms of me actually bringing it into my real life. And as a result, I've started to notice feelings, to name them, to give them space and honor them. And I've been able to spend a lot less time doing and more time being in my personal and my work life. So now let's turn to the psychedelic sessions. So as mentioned, I experienced 3 ketamine-assisted therapy sessions in the course of this program. The sessions took place at a small community hospital on Vancouver Island. And here's a photo of what the room looked like to give you a sense of what it was like. Although suffice it to say, I wasn't really present in this room for a good chunk of the time I spent there when the healing was actually happening. Going into the ketamine sessions, we were encouraged to consider our intentions. My intentions mainly centered around the fear and anxiety I'd been carrying around since childhood. I wanted to find core or real aspects of myself that had been buried by the fear. I wanted to become more open and loving to everyone, especially my family and friends. I wanted to learn to see strangers for their similarities and not their differences, to feel safe rather than threatened. And finally, I wanted to become more present and mindful throughout my waking life. So now I'd like to share with you some of the strange and beautiful experiences I had while I was under the acute effects of the ketamine. During the first session, I remember seeing myself in this state of fear, balled up in a corner, sort of cowering, not taking up any space. As I leaned into this image of myself, I started to expand, kind of arms outstretched, realizing I was now in a huge hall, like a great room in an ancient castle, stone walls rising upwards for miles. A space that first felt so tight and confined became infinitely expansive, big enough for my family, for my friends, but also for my enemies, for everyone I've ever known, for everyone on earth, for the whole universe, and it was filled with love. I experienced deep and profound feelings of happiness and safety. On my second session, I remember being inside this weird, trippy, orange-colored, kind of 60s style room with curvy walls and cozy furniture. I remember feelings of warmth, safety, comfort, and a deep sense of relaxation. I remember peering out of the doors and windows and seeing the world around me. I realized that this was a space that was actually inside myself, a place that's always there for me, and a place I can learn to come back to using tools like meditation. Throughout most of the experiences, sort of all 3, I remember experiencing feelings of lightness, of floating in this infinite sea of the universe, of mystical beauty like nothing I had ever seen. And then on the last session, I had an experience that it started out sort of feeling like death, like I was in the ground. I could smell and taste the earthy soil and feel its dampness and moisture. I felt myself starting to decay. It was dark and natural, but also beautiful. And then I felt myself being reborn as something new, sending roots down deep, deep, deep into the soil. I felt the sun peeking ever so slightly through the cracks in the dirt. And as I started to feel the soil get warmer, I felt myself opening up and sending a sprout up, up, up through the soil to greet the shining sun and feeling its bright, nourishing warmth on my cheeks. As strange as they might sound, those were some of my experiences. In order to process and integrate the multitude of ideas and visions that arose during those sessions, I engaged in a number of integrative processes, such as journaling, sharing the experiences with family and friends, sharing aspects during Roots to Thrive, during my community of practice groups, and making changes to my life based on the insights that I had experienced. And then coming out of the program, many of the participants in my group felt that they required ongoing support in order to sustain and continue to build on the healing they experienced. As a result, the Roots to Thrive team has been offering ongoing alumni sessions, which are open to all the past participants in the program. And although I've not been partaking myself in these, I've spoken to individuals that were in my cohort and have heard how very healing and sustaining these sessions have been for them. For myself, I've been able to continue to integrate and deepen my healing by engaging with a therapist that uses internal family systems and somatic modalities. I've been leading a weekly guys group that was based sort of on the same format as Roots to Thrive, and it's allowed me to continue the work that I started in the Roots to Thrive program with a group of men from my local community. As far as the results, from a psychosocial rehabilitation lens, the improvements I've experienced have been significant. On a social level, I've seen major shifts in how I show up for those around me, including my wife, children, my closest friends and family. My wife has told me that I'm supporting her in ways that she's always hoped for. I'm more present and playful with my children, wrestling with them first thing in the morning and making up silly stories with them at bedtime. With regards to work, a couple of years ago when I left my job as a team leader, I was stressed to the max. My life and health were falling apart, and I quit my job and swore that I was never going to be a leader again. But this past January, after doing the Roots to Thrive program, I stepped back into that arena and took on a position to lead a new ACT team supporting individuals with the most severe and persistent mental illnesses in Maple Ridge. On paper, the stress that I've been under for the last several months shouldn't be any different than that which nearly crushed me a few years ago, and yet I'm thriving. My team members tell me that this is the best team they've ever worked on, and a knowledge exchange leader recently told me that she feels we're one of the most trauma-informed teams in the health authority. And what's more, I've been finding joy, having fun, and leaning in day after day. I'm not saying that I don't feel stressed at times, that I don't have shitty days, or that I don't lose my cool once in a while. But what's different is that I notice those things now, that I listen to them, and I find ways to give myself some compassion and love in those difficult moments. Spiritually, I've been connecting to nature and the world around me in deeper and more meaningful ways than I've ever experienced. I'm in awe of the profound beauty of the mountains, the forest, and the animals. I'm finding moments to stop and appreciate the deep interconnectedness of things on a spiritual level. Physically, I'm in the best shape of my adult life. I've been getting up at 5 a.m. for 5 days a week since November to work out. Recently took up trail running. I'm eating well, have more energy, and feeling really good in my body. And probably in relation to this presentation, most importantly, my mental health has never been stronger. Now when I'm faced with stressors, I notice that I'm less likely to react in my old unhealthy patterns. I've been finding space to pause, to become aware of what's happening for me, to give myself what I need in that moment, and to choose how to best respond. I've been doing mindfulness practice on a daily basis. I notice myself becoming more aware of my breath during the day, more aware of my body, more aware of my needs. I'm becoming more aware of the feeling that feelings are messengers and that they're trying to tell me something. And as I've started to notice this, it's allowed me to sort of give myself what I need. And in this way, I'm becoming more compassionate to myself and those around me. Finally, and importantly, quite honestly, the Roots to Thrive program has gifted me skills and knowledge I needed towards working towards sort of the most working towards and achieving improved wellness in all areas of my life, and the tools that I need to sustain this success over the course of my lifetime. Not only do I feel that, but it's also improving the lives of those around me, my wife, my children, close friends. I'm using the tools and skills I've learned and the methods, things that I've learned in the program to relate to myself, and teaching them to those, both explicitly, passing on the knowledge, and by example to those who are most dear to me. And by doing this, I feel like Roots to Thrive didn't just heal me as an individual, but I think it's also healing my whole community. So yeah, that's my presentation for today. Thank you so much.
Oh, I was just typing. Just what an honor to hear that journey. Thank you so much for your generosity, your kindness, your openness, and I think that's, there's a lot to learn from all that. I thank you so much. And thank you to each of the panelists. Yeah, to Pam, who led the way with helping us understand a little bit of the background. I really appreciated some of the annotations and some of the some of the journeys you brought us on. Thank you so much. And Shannon, I thank you as well. I think that your descriptions afforded us a deeper understanding of some of the nuances of what people's journeys, and I think very much accentuated by Benny's generous and presentation that where Chelsea just mentions, just to appreciate the energy and vulnerability. So thank you, each of you. Wow. We have 60 people on the line, and so we definitely welcome comments, thoughts, questions. And I do note that we had a couple of comments and questions, and thank you very much for answering an individual who had thoughts about joining up. So thank you for that. And early in the presentation, I think it was when Pam was speaking, we had Courtney who said, "I'm just wondering if in any of these clinical trials you notice are Indigenous shamans used to help facilitate the process." So I guess you're talking about some of those early trials. Feel free, Courtney, to
some of the early trials. Yeah, I wonder if you want to clarify. It's a really big question.
Right. Yeah, I guess sometimes in the early research, it would be curious to know if we had local Indigenous shamans who were part of that journey facilitating. Maybe that's.
Well, I mean, do you want to
go for it?
I'll jump in and then Shannon can. So I mean, a lot of this stuff is actually being done still by the same people that originally were doing the medicine. So in Peru and Brazil, there's long lineages of people that have been brought up in ayahuasca who are actually driving the research. And in fact, in Peru, you can actually get a PhD in ayahuasca, and a lot of these people have come up through their lineage. Same with Chuma, peyote is very well protected. And so if there are trials going there, I'm not well schooled on what exactly is going on right now, but yeah, those lineages have been held very strongly. In the molecules, of course, the molecules are new, so those are a bit more in the medical model. But I think in places where the lineage hasn't been broken, there certainly are people that have been brought up in that lineage, and I don't know that they would per se call themselves shamans. They would probably call themselves medicine holders or knowledge keepers. Shannon?
And yeah, maybe just to add to that, to bring it to present day, with the RTT CAP program, it is a huge priority for us to do this, really focusing on a reconciliation framework where we're bringing in the knowledge keepers to really drive a lot of the framework of this. So we incorporate elders in all of the kind of weekly teachings as much as we can, including in the ketamine sits, and really all of us on the team, they're mentors to us as well, like how in terms of grounding practices and really helping us kind of redirect when we get a little, stuck in an old way. So I think there is a model, and we're still feeling our way around how to do this well in a very colonized system. To bring them in is a really tricky process because it's not even super safe for a lot of these knowledge holders to come in. So yeah, this is a work in progress, I would say.
And I'd like to say too, it's a bit of a synergy too that is interesting. It's moving into new times where we all came from a community. Some of us are further away from that community, and it's a return to that with new, like in our case, we're using ketamine, which doesn't have a historical context, but we're bringing it back into the community of caring. And so it's really nice to see how we can gently and slowly bring these all back together to a place where the community is returning to health and whole, and recognize that we can do fusion work too, right? We can fuse things, and historically we would have fused knowledge. Everybody traveled and traded and shared and took the better and exchanged the better. So I think that we're in a really unique and wonderful time where we can fuse this knowledge together in different ways, and perhaps even better ways.
Thank you, Pamela. So I noticed that questions are coming in. So we only have 20 minutes left, but let's do the best we can. So the first one just in front of me right now, this Roseanne says she has so many questions and asks, is it happening in the interior health region? And are there applications for psychosis and schizophrenia? So I don't know who would like to attend to that question.
This is not happening in the interior health region, and we are very keen to partner with health authorities. That right now we are working in collaboration with Island Health, and we have developed this program, which is a public program, that would basically engage academia with health authorities so that it's a partnered strategy, no one person taking all of the weight. And so this is definitely how we see this could roadmap here in BC, and we're very keen to work collaboratively with any health authority here in BC.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very positive news. And maybe we could just attend to the second part of the question, which asks, are there applications for psychosis and schizophrenia?
That's a really good question. And here is the real challenge with research is, we have real world things happening, and then we have clinical trials. And clinical trials often exclude people because of things like psychosis and schizophrenia. And so it's very difficult to do trials that include those challenging conditions. And so what that leaves us to is observational trials. So having people report back what they are doing. And so, for instance, Mark Hayden has been meeting for decades with a gentleman who has schizophrenia and has been using microdosing LSD, low dose LSD, for a long time and he says what it does is it doesn't get rid of the voices, but it softens the voices. The voices are kinder. Now, we could never advocate, I could never as a physician tell a patient go and do this, but we're going to have to gather these kind of case reports and these things until we find a way to navigate doing real world trials. And that is a challenge. But we can do it. We can do that, and we just have to push to do real world trials.
It sounds like not yet. Thanks, Roseanne, for the question. Cher asks, what is a referral process for our TT cat?
Yeah, so right now, it's been a bit of a dicey road because we're like one little program and there just happens to be in a mental health crisis without a whole lot of tools that are working for people. So it's been really quite busy. So you can apply on the website. So it's just rootstothrive.com. There is a why and apply section. And we primarily, especially given with the need and how we are trying to responsibly vet this work with a fairly informed group, we are primarily focusing on healthcare providers. So that's, including the whole spectrum, right from psychiatrists to therapists and everybody in between, and clinicians as well. So yeah, all that to say, you can apply online. We aren't, if you're a healthcare provider, it's helpful. And you would then get a referral form from us. You take that to your provider, and then that referral form comes directly to us and the ball gets rolling from there.
So you're beginning, you're starting off, sounds like, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Chelsea asks, how would you recommend community members, specifically those currently seeking mental health assistance, find a realistic way to incorporate this holistic approach in their rehabilitation or in their healing?
Benny, you want to take that?
Go for it, Benny. Sure.
Oh man, that's a big question. To incorporate it. So I'm just trying to understand the question correctly. So if you've gone and done this program, how would you incorporate it into your daily, or like into your life beyond that? Is that, or how do you? Yeah, I'm just struggling. If you mean how to get access to it, I mean, I think. Yeah, maybe I'll answer it from a couple different perspectives. For me, I mean, to get access, Shannon. Okay, access. Yeah, so I think applying as Shannon has just described, and I think based on what I know, the hope is that this program is going to become more and more available. I've sort of led a team here in the Fraser Valley that's looking to bring it into this sort of Fraser Health region, still in early stages. So it's we're certainly not taking applications or anything like that yet. It's still figuring all of that out. But hopefully, as it becomes more available, I think probably watching the Roots to Thrive website is most likely the best place to find out more about that or to be able to apply. And yeah, I think hopefully it'll just become more and more available. I mean, the other thing is for psychedelics in general, I mean, there are many other avenues that can be taken to access psychedelic therapy, and then you can do sort of one-on-one integration work with a therapist and lots of that stuff. And I should say, you know, in my path to healing, I've explored some of those other options one-on-one with a therapist. And hands down, this Roots to Thrive approach is, I felt 100%, like 100 times more healing from this approach than I think you can get. And I'm not saying that those other approaches, like one-to-one with a therapist, aren't appropriate and beneficial in some ways, and probably the best case scenario for some people. But I think for most people, most of the time, at least based on my experience and the other people that went through this program with me, that an approach like this and doing the 12-week resiliency group work, based on the things that Shannon was describing, like it's just so much more therapeutic and just benefits your life in so many other ways. So if at all possible, trying to get into a program like this or work on expanding this, I think this is the way forward for sure.
Thanks, Benny. I guess you're really highlighting that the notion of community and how it's been just so deliberately developed in that way, with a community of supporters traveling together for those 12 weeks. Mm-hmm. So maybe you feel you've answered this, but Anne-Marie asks, are there any research you're aware of that use psychedelics in the treatment of psychosis? And I guess maybe.
I am not aware of, and Pam's comment about us having to learn to do real world research is kind of unique to psychedelics, given the prohibition and where we're at. So it's kind of uncharted territory.
Thank you. Yeah. Hanika adds, are there fewer side effects with the aforementioned treatments compared with traditional pharmaceuticals?
I think it's hard to really compare these. You know, it's actually what I want to do. I'm not going to answer that question, but I'm going to answer a question that comes up a lot. Are these addictive? Well, this is a question I find really interesting as a physician, because we start people on medications all the time without even thinking about that. We start people on antidepressants that are really difficult to get off of. And we do it all the time, and we do it because we're hoping to help. We're hoping that people will feel better. And these psychedelic medicines also are doing that. They are helping people feel better. So a patient recently asked me, said, my psychiatrist says, you know, you shouldn't do a psychiatric or psychedelic medicine because you might need it again. And that kind of just like boggled my mind, because they take venlafaxine every single friggin' day. Like, you know, is that comment seems lost on doctors, that we give people prescriptions for life knowing that they may never have to come off of it. We treat it like a palliative condition. So I'm speaking a bit forcefully here on it, but if somebody needs like a ketamine session every 3 months, but they're better and they're with their kids and they can show up for work and they can have happiness and engagement, then if they need it every 3 months, I'm totally fine with that, because we don't give a hypertensive medication to a patient going, be careful, you might get addicted to this, or you might need it for life to control your blood pressure. What we want to do is think, is there an efficacy here? Does it help people? Does it save harm? And these are really seriously not addictive medications. So are there side effects? There certainly can be side effects with anything, but they're also mostly what we would say expected effects. We would expect that somebody might have some you might have a headache after, you might feel nauseated after, you might change your life, you might quit your job after. There are things that you might change in your life. But side effects, I would say probably overall, generally less side effects. But there's always effects, some good, some bad, with anything.
And I think too, if we really look at this in a holistic lens, is that like our emotional pain often manifests as physical pain, which can manifest as all sorts of things when that's coming out of us and when we're in that. So it's a tricky question because it can't really be siloed out. It's all part of the overall process, which is not always pleasant, and that may not be physically pleasant. And yeah, but it's part of it at the same time. Oh, you're on mute, Regina. Or Regina. I'm not sure how to.
Thank you so much. I need a little help, clearly. So the next question is something I was really interested in as well. So the cost to the client, or is it all MSP?
Let me talk about that one. So it is tricky. We're 100% public, which means there's no profits, completely cost recovery. If there were some profit, to go right back into the client, into sponsorships or some other form of service. So it costs money. So through VIU, there is a patient fee. If the full fee is $5,850 right now, which is, it's a bit steep for middle-class families. We are also working with folks at the ministry and having lots of conversations with lots of agencies who are also, we have sponsoring agencies which sponsor their members to come through. So the members aren't paying, but they're paying. And we have donations. One of the biggest barriers in this road mapping process is that we have a very archaic MSP billing and reimbursement system, and it is not friendly to psychedelic assisted therapies. And it doesn't even pay our MDs well, which are pretty much the only people that are paid through that system to do this work. So there is going to be a huge effort on behalf of the provincial and federal regulatory bodies and budget holders to really look at how we do this form of mental health differently with a return on investment approach. And we have to fund the upfront costs to see the trickle down benefits. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you.
Can I just jump in also and say that as a past participant, I know that number is huge, and especially as like a nurse that works with very vulnerable, marginalized individuals, it's troubling to hear that there's that large of a cost associated and that barrier. And I know that Shannon's doing everything she can, and the team is doing everything that they can to reduce that and work towards equity and that kind of thing. But I also want to say that as a person that's gone through the program, that if I needed, like knowing what I know now, if the opportunity was here to, having not done the program, to do it for $6,000, I would do it, and it would, and I don't have a lot of money in the bank. Like, it's worth every penny. And I mean, I think that there needs to be a bit of a shift in our mindset as well as how we prioritize and look at our mental health, because, we'll often shell out several $1,000s to go to Hawaii for a week or something like that. And I can tell you that going through this program is giving me tools and like connection to myself that I'm going to carry with me for the rest of my life. And so hopefully, as we start to change our understanding of our wellness in a more holistic sense, we'll learn to value and put a value, understand the value of doing this kind of work. And it's not just a one and done kind of thing, I guess. Yeah.
I notice we have 3 more questions. We have 5 more minutes. This person asks, do people have to come off their antidepressants, or can they still continue on their medication?
That's one of the nice things about ketamine. It's actually an incredibly safe medication. There's only 2 medications that really interfere that lower the effectiveness of ketamine, and one is lamotrigine and the other is benzodiazepines. And so if people were on lamotrigine, we would be hesitant to have them in the program. But benzos, we can start talking about it early. Unfortunately, the program itself is anxiety lowering. So it has not really been a huge issue for those who were on higher doses of benzos at the beginning. By the time they got to the session for their ketamine, they were actually had a lot of tools in their toolbox. They had a lot of reduction in anxiety already. I mean, the program itself is very healing. The ketamine is an assistant to the program. So yeah, so those are the two, but people can stay on their almost every other medication.
Thank you. This person asks, are you able to do a professional development session for providers such as psychiatrists?
Yes. Yes, we are.
Good. All right. What did you do? Let's see. This person just asked, I briefly saw a slide mentioned energy work. Can you speak to that aspect of the program a little bit?
Yeah, energy work in this program, as I often say, it's the most important part. The more I do this work, the more I really, really believe that. That's hard to understand from a biomedical perspective. So, you know, I don't lead with that, but we do have members of our team. Helen Watler is actually our kind of lead somatic energy modalities, working out kind of how we look at the entire person, including our very scientific energy field that we carry with us. So yes, we incorporate it, and we also incorporate the idea of people feeling into their own energy as part of gaining congruence and feeling into their gut and listening to that as part of their signal. Like using all of their capacities is very much a part of coming into who we are as whole people. So I'll leave it there.
We have another couple of minutes. This person just suggests applying to MOOH for funding. I guess that's a little tip, maybe that might be useful. And with that, I know it's 11:57, so maybe we'll just begin to close. I really appreciate your contributions today. I'm very impressed with how situated the work is in terms of trauma-informed care, and just, I guess, really resonates with a lot of the work. I love how you build this notion of trust with the community. As I say, they journey together. That seems enormously powerful. And it just, I guess what you're saying is in some respects, there's this value added to adding substances as individuals just build that sense of self again, and that trust not only with the individuals, but with themselves as well. And just build those skills and comfort level. And I'm sure I'm not doing justice to your work, but it's just
you're doing great.
Thanks. Yeah, so I know we have no more questions, but maybe you just want to, each of you maybe just wants to finish out with maybe a sentence of closing and to help us all just go next steps.
Can I'm going to use mine to just wrap up one little question there that I did not answer, is that we do music, and very particular music without words, because people are in a very suggestive state, is incredibly important. It is often within these journeys, the connector between all of the individuals. They're individually journeying and they're collectively being held together by this, you know, this narration within the music. So incredibly important in this work. And that was my part. I will pass to Pam.
Thanks. I would say that, you know, as a physician, I am happier than I've ever been working on this team. To me, it feels like the best team I have ever worked with. And we are doing really good work and really meaningful work. And I feel really nourished as a physician. I don't feel burnt out. I feel like, wow. And I really would hope this for everyone in healthcare. And I really do feel like this is the model we are returning to. I feel like we're returning back to our roots and back to our community and back to our home. And we as healthcare providers need to be just as healthy as those that we serve. Benny?
Yeah, I'd like to echo what you said, Pam. And I think just reinforce that, like, yeah, for me as a nurse, this has been 100% the most nourishing program and work that I've ever done. And I think part of it's, you know, part of it is because it's so community-based and non-hierarchical, like what Shannon was saying earlier about we're all patient partners in this, that we all have to take off our hats, you know, doctors, psychologists, therapists, nurses. When we step into these groups with each other, whether you're a facilitator or a participant, you have the exact same role in these meetings, and the way that you heal from it is just it's just so beautiful. And, you know, whether even when I was facilitating, I was healing from it just as much as I was when I was a participant. So it's a whole different way of looking at mental health care. It's very sort of peer oriented and very holistic and non-hierarchical and community based. And I think that that's where real health and mental wellness is where we're going to find it, and where, you know, the best healing comes from. So thank you.
So Chelsea adds a brilliant and beautiful way forward, hopeful for additional research and resources and information sharing. Many thanks to you all. I'm an outreach worker, she says, for mental health, and so appreciative of the community equality and collaboration you've presented here today. Much love. Thanks for that, Chelsea. That's a lovely way to end our time together. Again, thank you from our hearts. This is a very different presentation from us, so we're very grateful for just having the opportunity to be with you today. Thank you. Be well.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Have
Thank
a great
you.
day, everyone.